Hello and welcome. Thanks for joining me, astrologer Patrick Arundell. Today I'm going to do a deep dive into the spring equinox, which has particular importance in the astrological calendar because this is the vernal point. It's when the sun goes to the start of its journey through the zodiac sign. So it moves into the sign of Aries. Now this occurs at 9:38 a.m. on the 20th this year, the 20th of March, and that's Universal Central Time. Now what I'm going to do is not just talk about the significance of the sun returning to Aries. I'm going to actually analyse the chart, the birth chart for this moment, because it's going to give us a clue what the next year holds. So if you like, this is the Astrological New Year chart. We obviously get the annual solar return for us all at 1 second past midnight on the 1st of January each year. We can do the same on our own natal chart. So when the sun gets back to the degree of when we were born, we can have a snapshot of that moment. We can also do the same with our lunar returns as well. So this is a snapshot of what the next year will hold from an astrological viewpoint for the world at large. So it's incredibly important, incredibly powerful. Now, if you've yet to subscribe to my channel, I'd be delighted if you did so now. Please click or tap on the bell notification symbol. I'm also at the end of this overview going to break down the prospects for each of the 12 zodiac signs over the next year. So please stay with me for those. I will drop some timestamps underneath as well. Now, if you would like to have a one-to-one with me and have your nativity analysed in this kind of way and look at also how your life is evolving through your progress chart and also your directions, and also look at your solar return based on your birthday, either if it was the last birthday, if there's still some time to go, or your coming birthday, then please see the link beneath this video, because you can check out my testimonials that I have from clients all over the world. Also, if you're newer to astrology or coming more into a point of understanding beyond your zodiac sign and you'd like to order your personal horoscope reports, my affordable packages are also available by clicking the link beneath this video. There is a particular special offer for a 12-month forecast and a character analysis based on your time, date and place of birth. But please see the wheel on the screen. And you can see that the sun is absolutely at 0 degrees, 0 minutes of Aries. And this is very, very important because Aries is a cardinal sign. Cardinality is to do with initiation. It's to do with power and leadership. There are 4 cardinal signs. The others are Cancer, Libra and Capricorn. So we have 4 cardinal quadrants for each quarter of the year. And these are based absolutely on the equinoxes and the solstices. So this spring equinox is when the sun returns to Aries. The summer solstice, the sun moves to Cancer, another earth point. And then we have the autumn equinox, the sun moves into Libra. And finally, the winter solstice, 0 degrees Capricorn, and we have the last quadrant of the year. And Western tropical astrology is based on the seasons. It's not based on, if you like, the precession of the equinoxes. So the moving planets mean that there is a difference of about 24 degrees. And in Vedic astrology, this moment will be different. So Western astrology is quite unique in this regard, but incredibly accurate, even though the framework of the seasons uses the constellations above only in a symbolic form. Did you know zodiac just is basically Greek for zoo, wheel, zodiac wheel. So the animals of the sky. So that's essentially what the zodiac means. But this first point is so important because the final 30 degrees of the last quadrant of each year is dominated by Pisces season, which is watery, it's very emotional, it's very mutable. And so the sun moving back to Aries is when we come to an end of a period, a month's period of reflection, of quieter physical vitality, and a more inward phase, and then we're launching a new campaign. It's very, very exciting. Aries energy is about living in the moment. It's not so much about analysing things, it's about listening to our hunches. But because of the fire, the element that dominates the sign of Aries, this gives us a huge gust of determination, courage and passion to go forwards into our new astrological year. But the critical thing that I want you to look at with this chart is if we look at where the moon is actually in the sign of Gemini. And it's really quite close to the North Node, but in the 12th house. The 12th house is very Piscean. So I feel that what this particular combination is asking us to do is to reflect on the value of our words and our statements more carefully as a society over the next year. Because we have an opportunity these days, each and every citizen in the Western world anyway, to pretty well go on a computer or a smartphone and share an opinion. And if that opinion lacks fact or is a bit robust in terms of a personal observation on somebody else, that can be quite tough to be on the end of. And yet, we can all feel very passionate, whether it's about COVID, about vaccination, about women's rights, about racism, about Brexit, about the presidential campaign, about the prospects of the GOP, whatever it is that we feel very, very passionate about, people will take to social media and express their opinions. But I think what this return of the new astrological year is asking us to use our words as judiciously as possible over the next year, to embrace more compassion along with our need to express our mental ideas, which comes from the sign of Gemini. So to have the moon very close to the North Node is beautiful, but in the 12th house, particularly with Mars there, which is quite a robust place to have Mars. A lot of journalists have Mars in Gemini, or a lot of sports people. But in the 12th house, it's saying, let's be careful how we express ourselves. Now, if we take the midpoint between the sun, which is obviously critical, that 0 degrees in Aries, and where the moon is at 16 degrees Gemini, it's actually at 8 degrees in Taurus. And this is really important, you can see from the arrow on the screen, because that is conjunct Uranus. And Uranus is also in this chart, based on Universal Central Time, based on Greenwich. It means the ascendant for this new year is in Gemini, so it's very much to do with communication. But it does mean the midpoint, the balance of the masculine and feminine. We're not talking about genders here, we're not talking about sexuality. We're talking about everyone has thrust, desire to make things happen in the immediate sense of the sun, and the moon is the more receptive feeling and nurturing energy, and the combination of those two together is next to Uranus, but in the 12th house. And you can see in the 9th house of ideas and philosophies, we have Saturn, and Saturn is squaring with the midpoint of the moon and the sun and Uranus. So that tells you the next year can be quite turbulent. And I predicted in all my turn of the year ahead forecasts, that this year would be quite turbulent. There would be a lot of citizen protests because Saturn and Uranus in a square, a 90-degree square, which is very tension forging. One is about freedom of speech, about freedom of movement, about restlessness, Uranus. The other is very much about the status quo. It's about authority. It's about rules and regulations, Saturn. It may be in Aquarius, And it may not be quite as ardent around those control issues as it was in its other sign of Capricorn over the last couple of years, but it still has a degree of traditionality linked to it, even in Aquarius. So the square between Saturn, the midpoint, and Uranus points towards a lot of tension. The 9th house is about our points of view. The 12th house is about our psychological needs, but it can be about where we feel repressed. So whether it is about people's rights in some of the things I've touched upon, certainly to do with equalities, the need to find a voice where equalities have been suppressed is going to be very strong. But there are certain societies in the world where it doesn't matter if you take to the streets and show great courage to express your point of view, or you try to use digital media, the state closes it down. And that's what happens in Russia with the protests against Alexei Navalny and many other things that have happened over the years. It's happening in Hong Kong, it's happening in Myanmar, it's happening in India. You know, some people would say it's happening in Britain, it's happening in the USA, but we still have fundamentally much greater rights than lots of other countries in the world. So I think what this chart is saying is that there's going to continue to be an uprising of tension and suppressed rage, which is Uranus conjunct that midpoint, pushing back against unfair rules and regulations. But I think collectively as human beings, we also need to be aware of every single word we craft, particularly about another person. Because whether I have personal opinions about certain public figures, and I might analyse their horoscopes from time to time, but I always try to do it in a very proportionate way, because every person has some qualities. And even if we personally don't like them, it's vitally important we don't destroy people. And I think one of the very big problems with the openness of democracy is that everyone's got a right to talk or to say what they want, but there's no validation of the accuracy of what they're saying. And that does lead to abuse. And you can only see what happens in school situations where, you know, one child will be picked on and suddenly can get 200 or 300 Facebook comments from people they don't even know. This can destroy people. So I think this chart is saying continue to push back about the things you feel that are unjust, but try to express your protest, your point of view in as constructive a way as possible, myself included. So I should say one. And then you can see we have a collection of energy in the 11th house, which is very much the unity of us all. This is the direction of travel for person-kind. And Venus, the planet of love and affection, is very close to the Sun. It's only 1.5 degrees away. So it may be in the sign of Pisces. So it's not in the same sign as Aquarius, as Aries, the Sun, but it's still very close. So it's saying we can higher the frequency of our communication by having more awareness of the things we have in common rather than always focusing on the things that make us different. The other thing that is very positive about this chart is that Jupiter, the planet of hope, the planet of renewal, the planet of optimism, the planet of fortune, is right on the midheaven. So you can see 20 degrees 52 is Jupiter, and the midheaven is at 20 degrees 14. So that points towards new leaders coming through. Probably people who are younger, to be honest. We've seen in Hong Kong, some of the leaders there, 17, 18, 19, 20 years of age. Incredible courage, but also vision and a true understanding of what's really important. So there is going to be new leaders coming through, and that can be very helpful. We've also got a great sextile between Pluto in the 8th house of financial transformation with Venus in the 11th house. So that's kind of saying there's a new financial reality that's going to take shape. Some of what's developing through artificial intelligence, automation, and robotics is not encouraging for person-kind, in my humble opinion. But if we get the balance between perhaps reducing the amount of time we work and create more leisure time but people are usefully employed in what they do and feel that they're making a contribution to society, then the Aquarian age that we're coming into can be more of a success than I personally fear it can be. I fear that there can be a lot of continued focus on downside-in human input. So we're going through another industrial revolution. It's just more of a technological one. And just like people were stripped out the fields at the end of the 1800s or stripped out of factories as automation has come through, not everyone can be doing a high-tech job. And so we need to be careful what we wish for when we're buying stuff online, where we eliminate going into a retail outlet, for example, when we have the human interaction, we have the pleasure of breathing in the fresh air, going for a coffee, chatting with our friends or family, trying things on. That's very much a human experience. If we all go digital, it's going to become more of a remote, dystopian type of world that we live in. And that's Saturn in Aquarius, quite frankly. So what I would say is that Saturn does forge a very stable link with Mars. And that's helpful because in the earlier part of this year, Mars and Saturn, in fact Mars, when it went through its transit from the 7th of January for 6 weeks in the sign of Taurus, it was actually in quite a dust-up with the planets in Aquarius at that time, which wasn't helpful. But this is a much more constructive combination. So there are some good things here, some very good things, but I think the midpoint between the Sun and the Moon, conjunct Uranus, squaring Saturn, if I was looking at a natal chart, I'd be saying to someone, look, this is your solar return. I think that there is going to be a degree of tension between the new order that needs to come through and where we want to cling on to what we felt comfortable with, but especially if we feel that the new order is being imposed upon us rather than what we want. And as citizens, we all like to feel that we have a degree of control. So that's how I see the overview of this amazingly important event. The next 30 days is a chance for us to really get on the front foot. I certainly think in terms of the COVID management situation in Britain, there seems to be much more joined up thinking. You may be someone who doesn't believe in vaccines or using technology to track and trace. My argument to you on the track and trace, well, if you've got a smartphone, unless you really, really know what you're doing, and even then, if you really know what you're doing, if you really feel that you've kept Microsoft or Apple or Facebook out of your personal affairs, good for you, because I think it's very difficult for a lot of us. So we can worry about big government. I think big technology is much more of a challenge for our sense of privacy. But this chart does point towards collective togetherness in some ways and collective activity in a positive and constructive way. We can see new leadership coming through, but I feel us all as individuals, if we find a way to express ourselves constructively with a bit more care, we will take out a lot of the hate speech which is dominating the digital airways at the present time. Please stay with me for your individual zodiac sign forecast for each of the 12 zodiac signs. So Aries, for you, a new beginning. And if your birthday is right at the start of Aries, this is going to give you a major boost. If your physical energy has been really, really low of late, my progressed sun is 3 degrees in Aries, and it really has been low, because when Neptune's very close to the sun and of course was on top of that new moon on the 13th, that is draining. It's very heightening in terms of our sensitivity and the potential to be compassionate. But I think you've been very caught up on things from the past. You've got an opportunity now to start cooking on gas, as they say, and moving forwards in a much more optimistic way. There's a lot of bubbliness around your 3rd solar house with this chart. Really go for it. There's new friendships coming in. This is a time to draw a line in the sand. You've got Chiron conjunct Ceres in your chart, which is very helpful, I feel. Ceres is asking you to plant seeds, especially if you've got parts of your situation which feel very hurtful. And that could be linked to past love and past investment of your emotions, which are dominated by the energy of the sign of Pisces. So it's time to really get on the front foot and really be very optimistic about what is coming your way over the next year. Now Taurus, because you have Uranus and it is next to that midpoint, I think, and you have the gathering of energy in the sign of Gemini, you are going to be thinking about resources a lot. And Saturn for you is in your 10th house. So if you're doing something to do with marshalling your resources to do with property, because of Mars being your desire in the 2nd house of, consuming things, and Saturn in the 10th house of your role in life, I think this augurs well for you. But of course, the Sun is in your 12th house. So over the next 3 or 4 weeks, you may go through a period of a transition where you're clearing up some loose ends, getting ready for your new beginning, which will come once the Sun enters Taurus. But I think there's a lot for you to be excited about looking forwards in a fresh way, being more experimental in your approach, not being quite so hidebound with what you're comfortable with. I think most Taurus people have really got the hang of this over the last few years with Uranus, but of course with Pluto and more recently Saturn and Jupiter in your 9th house, all pushing you to change things up, liberate yourself from the things that are no longer serving your greater good. Now for you, Gemini, I love this chart because it's very much about you taking the initiative. With the Moon, the Node and Mars all in your sign, you can play a leading role in group situations. It's just that with Uranus still being in the 12th house, and of course this midpoint on this particular natal chart, it's just that you still need to stay in touch with the things that maybe you've been ignoring for some time. It may be things that you do know about yourself and you actually feel that in an intellectual sense you're completely familiar with some of the things that you found a bit tricky in life, but have you really integrated them in a more emotional or spiritual way? Because I'm an air sign and because my draconic sun is in Gemini, because I've got a lot of 3rd house which is very Gemini, it's very easy for people who are very Gemini-like to be quick, witty, amusing, intellectually stimulating, but it is important to stop, pause and integrate emotions. And it doesn't necessarily have to always come through the prism of interaction with others. It's our relationship with ourselves that's so important. And I think you may surprise yourself, over the next year. Uranus on that midpoint is going to bring some changes. The compassionate side of your nature particularly needs to find an outlet, and it will. Cancer. Now, the cardinal point is very important for you because this pictures the Sun into the part of your horoscope that's to do with your role in life and responsibilities, obligations, but also where you're more goal orientated, so about your ambitions. And because there are these planets in Gemini, I feel to really make the most of your opportunities to make progress, you need to stay very much in touch with perhaps the more subconscious side of your nature, perhaps even your fears and anxieties. Now Leo, having the Sun move into a sister fire sign, the fire triplicity, is terrific. This really wants or pushes you to open up the throttle and be much more explorative, which has been really difficult with COVID. And you've had that big clash going on in recent years between your 6th and 9th solar houses. So even if you wanted to be more experimental, the posse of planets in Capricorn was reminding you got to do this, you made this commitment, there's this person to take care of. Hasn't been so easy to be a free spirit, but with all these planets in Gemini, you can really feel a sense of revival over the next month particularly, but over the next year in general. I think a very exciting time for you. And having Jupiter and Saturn in your 7th house points towards changes, improvements, alterations around your love life or relationships in general. Virgo. Well, the vernal equinox for you is very much about resources, and that can mean investments, it can mean business, the more entrepreneurial side of your nature, because you've got those planets right at the top of your chart in your 10th house, and you've got Saturn and Jupiter in the 6th house of your solar horoscope. That's about the detail. So the Gemini stuff's about the big picture and your ambitions, and remember you've got Mars there, so that's going to give you more self-confidence, more authority. But the Sun and Venus are right on that 8th house cusp. So you want to transform things, I think, around work, money, earnings, intimacy. But I think this chart is saying to you need to show more self-confidence. Break out of just living in a very organised, meticulous way, which may make you feel safe, but I think it's stifling you. Over to you. Now, Libra, I love this chart for you, to be honest. It's been a tough old time for Libran ascendant people, Libran mood people, Libran stellium people over the last few years. It's all been about putting down those boundaries. But there's a lot to love about this chart, you know, for you, and not least around relationships. If you're in a relationship which isn't working, move on. You know, you've got that collection of energy in your ninth solar house. Link up with new people who interest you, spark you. Don't just stay with something because it feels at some level safe. It's probably starving you of energy in some significant way. And with having Saturn and Jupiter in your 5th house, Saturn's asking you to take this area of life seriously. Jupiter's asking you to take your opportunities seriously. Go for it. And with Venus, your ruler, and the Sun right on that 7th house cusp, someone significant can come into your world in the next year. Believe me. Scorpio. Well, for you, the vernal equinox is all about the practicalities in your life. And if your life is running super smooth, organised, then great, good for you. But for most of us, even if we achieve that, is there something else that maybe we're not directing our energy towards we could? And the thing with the 6th house, the Sun, and with having Venus very close to the Sun, even if it's disassociate because it's just into Pisces, one of the things that I would say to you is that you need to feel passionate about where you help people, where you are organised, the type of work you do. And because Saturn's in your 4th house, that's about emotion. If you're ignoring your emotions, and with all that 8th house energy with the Gemini, particularly with the traditional ruler of Mars, you need to get in touch with what really makes you feel excited. And the clue is Uranus. Again, like Libra, don't be staying in something which isn't really making you feel excited. Life's for living. It's so short. You can't... honestly, if you're younger than I am, which many of you, of course, will be, I've always been a bit of a Peter Pan. It absolutely flashes by. Don't stick with something that's stupefying you, killing your sense of feeling alive and you know, excited and stimulated. Don't stick with your fixed energy just to maintain the status quo. Now, Sagittarius, for you, I really love this, because Venus, even if it is disassociate, is just on that Sun. So love, pleasure, joy, it's all going to be part of your journey over the next year, believe me. And you have a lovely set of influences there, the Moon, the Node, Mars in your 7th house of relating. Okay, things may need to change. Uranus on the midpoint in the 6th house of everyday routines. But there's so much to like about this chart. And with Pluto and Venus in a wonderful sextile, I do feel that the financial problems that have been quite manifest over the last couple of years, they can start to ease. You need to tell people about your ideas. With Jupiter on this midheaven, what a wonderful opportunity. People are going to be very receptive to what you have to say. Now, Capricorn, for you being a cardinal sign, the interesting thing about this chart is that Eros, which is the asteroid of sort of deeper relating, Juno is more about how we interact. I think Eros is more where we feel that spark of emotion. So Eros is right on your cardinal points. So that's interesting. But guess what? It is squaring up with the Sun and Venus. And the Sun and Venus are on your 4th house cusp. If you're not happy with the way things are in your emotional life, whether it's where you live, who you live with, how you live there, the decorative order of your situation, if there's something that isn't really fulfilling you, I think you could yearn for that greater spark of excitement. And Uranus is there on that midpoint, giving you the opportunity to change it. It's just whether you want to stick with what you know. And I think financially over the next year, you may have to become more inventive about how you earn an income. Aquarius, well, the Sun moving to the vernal point, the spring equinox, is glorious because it's the 3rd house, which is very airy, very Gemini-like, and you've got that cluster also in Gemini. I'm just thinking about this chart from my own natal chart. So Saturn's on my moon and also Venus, which are in my 4th house of the home. And guess what? We're moving. So a structural change, Saturn. And then that forges, for me anyway, a great link with Mars, the North Node, and also the moon. So looks like a good chart for my spring equinox return. But for Aquarius people generally, I think having Venus in the 2nd house, it's late, but it is in the 2nd house, forging a great link to Pluto. I would say all the hard work that's gone in over many years, perhaps stretching back as far as 2008, you could start to really receive the benefits of that. Some kind of new beginnings in there as well. There could be a change on the home front because of obviously Uranus being there. Uranus is a very electric energy, as you know, because your own moods, like mine, can alter a little bit. We can be a bit quirky, a bit dotty at times, and then a bit more serious. But I think that there's going to be surprises around the home and family. Perhaps you have been someone who's never thought you'd have a child. Maybe you will start to have a child. Perhaps you're the sort of person who thought, oh, I'm never going to move. I love living in this town all my life. And suddenly you can up sticks and off you go. Some changes around where you live or your emotional outlook are almost inevitable in this next year. But overwhelmingly, this is a great chart with lots of communication possibilities for you, whether you're looking for love, new friendships, greater interaction, sharing your ideas. Generally, a very positive chart. Which brings us to Pisces. Now, for you Pisces, the location of Uranus in the midpoint is in your 3rd house of how you think. So your need to connect with siblings, if you have them, can be very strong, or neighbours, or you'll need to have space from them. It just depends on your unique situation. But having Mars, the node and the moon in your 4th house, I think you could move as well, particularly if it puts you back close to where your siblings are. That wouldn't be a surprise at all. Also, you want to make sure that your resources are working well for you, and they can. In fact, I would say some Pisces people can have an uptick in their earnings. You also have a lovely link between Pluto in the 11th house of friendships and Venus in your sign. Someone could be drawn to you in the next year, you know, but it could be someone from your past with Jupiter, your co-ruler, and Saturn in your 12th house. It may be someone that hasn't necessarily been at the forefront of your thinking, but maybe there's something about this person who's got a kind of understanding of your historical roots or your cultural background or the instinctive part of your nature. This is much more so, I think, if you're an older Pisces person. But don't be surprised if there is. I'm not saying it will be an old flame, because if there is an old flame that's very important to you and there's still some outstanding stuff around that, I don't want you to get false hope. But I think it could be someone linked to the early years of your life, perhaps the first 20 years of your life, someone who really gets the depth of your very being. And they could be in touch, maybe it's someone up to the age of 30, could be in touch through social media, maybe a friend of a friend or a family member will say, hey, do you know what, I saw so-and-so. No, that kind of conversation could be very possible, you know, especially with Jupiter in your 12th house. Or you could be reminiscing for someone from your past. But I think there is a tenderness about this chart for you. So if you do move, I think you want to feel some kind of emotional connection to where it is you're living or whom you're living near. But if you retain a little bit of space and independence in the bargain, I think you will have absolutely got everything you need. So that concludes the spring equinox forecast for each of the 12 zodiac signs for the year ahead. Thank you so much for joining me. If you have yet to subscribe to my channel, I really would be grateful if you did. I have been suffering a little bit with my health again recently, so I have got behind because we've been doing a bit too much. If you follow the daily show, you'll know that. But please do engage with my videos as much as you can. I really appreciate it. Have been on YouTube a long time. Because I do weekly videos and have done from the beginning, my average video is quite small in length, and that means that under the algorithm that YouTube uses, my videos don't get shared with many people. And sometimes people will come on and say, oh my word, I didn't know about you, you're incredibly accurate, which is incredibly nice of them. And so if you can share or put them on Facebook or whatever, I'd be enormously grateful. But for now, please stay safe, take care, and I wish you all the best over the next year. Thank you.